After Pilate pronounced sentence on Jesus, he was led away to be crucified. And in this map, it shows Jesus being led down the traditional road called the Via Dolorosa to the site of Golgotha, which they have here in this map as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But here we see the traditional painting of Jesus hanging on the cross. And notice the nails in his feet going from the top down. And so we have many descriptions of crucifixion in the literature, in ancient writings, but up till a few years ago, we didn't have any archaeological evidence for crucifixion. And then a number of years ago, in an ossuary, a bone box of an individual by the name of Yehohanan, they found an ankle bone with a nail from crucifixion right through the ankle bone. And so this is our first bit of archaeological evidence for crucifixion. We had plenty of literary sources before this time. And so they've kind of revised their theory as to where the nails would have pierced the crucified person's feet. And in this particular example, it would have come from the side. So this is how the crucified man is depicted here, the nails not coming through from the top of the foot, but on the side of the foot. As you'll notice here, the crucified person is sitting on a little cross beam for him to sit on. And we need to remember that the purpose of crucifixion was not to kill the person quickly. There are more efficient ways to do that. The purpose of crucifixion was a slow, agonizing death. And so eventually the person being crucified would become so weak he could no longer breathe or lift up his diaphragm, and they would die of asphyxiation. This little seat allowed the crucified person to kind of push up a little bit and to breathe a little more easily, thus prolonging the agony. Remember when the soldiers wanted to hasten things up, they broke the legs of the others being crucified, but when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. And the reason why breaking the legs hastens death is because you can push up a little bit, and that aids in breathing. But once the legs are broken, of course, that's no longer possible, and that hastens death. John 19:17 says, "They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha." And near the garden tomb today is a rock face that, if you look at it, kind of looks like a skull. You can see the eye sockets and even the nose. But if we look at drawings from this area, and this was an area of quarrying, and a couple centuries back there were some drawings from this area, and this particular rock face wasn't there. So very likely that this is not the original Golgotha. Maybe it's somewhere else, but it does remind us of the name. Hebrews 13:12 says, "Therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate." So Hebrews makes it clear that Jesus died outside the gate, the city walls, and in this model of Jerusalem that they constructed, they did put Jesus' crucifixion spot outside the city walls. One candidate for the place of crucifixion and burial is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this church has a long tradition. It was founded by Queen Helena back in the 4th century. She was the mother of Constantine. And so it has a rather long tradition. Here's a depiction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on the mosaic map that we've already seen at Medeba, and this is from the 6th century. Here in the wider angle view, we see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the center of the picture on the bottom half of the horizontal white line. It's upside down in this picture. I reversed it in the previous picture just to help you out. And so it's depicted in this map of Jerusalem from the 6th century. Because of the presence of 1st century tombs in the area of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it is a pretty good candidate for the burial place of Jesus. It has a long tradition, and it has 1st century tombs. As we'll see, the garden tomb is much too old. And so the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, of the two candidates for the burial place of Jesus, this and the garden tomb, makes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre a better choice than Gordon's Calvary, the garden tomb. Well, let's go over to the garden tomb. It's just a little bit to the north. It's a very good spot for remembering the death of Christ, a very pleasant, quiet place to meditate and remember that, as opposed to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is usually crowded and cramped, and it's hard to really do any kind of reflection there. Let's take a look inside the tomb. And here's the burial spot that they'll point out to you. But leading archaeologists have concluded that this tomb is an Iron Age tomb, which makes it far too old to be a 1st century tomb. Remember, the scriptures tell us that Jesus was buried in a new tomb, that no one had yet been laid. So this tomb is far too old, maybe 500-600 years too old. So with pretty good certainty, we can say that Gordon's Calvary, or the garden tomb, is not the authentic burial place of Jesus. But the important thing is the event that happened there, not so much the place, but that Jesus did rise from the dead. Let's take a look of an example of a rolling stone tomb. There's not too many in the country, maybe 3 or 4, but there is one in Jerusalem at Herod's family tomb, and there's a huge, heavy stone that slides in a track in front of the tomb. Let's go inside and see what it looks like from the inside looking out. So you can see the huge rolling stone on the right side, and once that stone is pushed across the entrance of the tomb, it fits in kind of a groove there, and there's no way that you're going to move that stone from the inside. There's just no leverage you can get. It's just a flat surface at that point. One of the theories of the empty tomb by those who don't hold to the resurrection is that Jesus resuscitated and basically escaped from the tomb. Well, that was highly unlikely, as many authorities have pointed out. The stone, you can't move it from the inside, plus there was Roman guard on the outside. At the garden tomb, when I was in Israel, I went to an Easter service there, and we had the privilege of having a guest speaker, and that guest speaker was Dr. Bill Bright. And so here's the choir singing during that service. I wasn't able to get a picture of Dr. Bright during the service, but it was nice to have him there preaching at the garden tomb on Easter. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he was lying." Matthew 28, 5-6. Well, Jesus rose from the dead. He appeared to many during that time. Then he ascended from the top of the Mount of Olives back to heaven. And this dome, it's called the Dome of the Ascension, commemorates Jesus' ascension back into heaven. So it's on the summit of the Mount of Olives. Acts 1:11-12 says, "They also said, 'Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus, who has been taken up from you into heaven, will come in just the same way as you've watched him go into heaven.' Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day journey away." Acts 1:11-12. So we know that Jesus rose from that spot on the summit of the Mount of Olives, and Zechariah tells us that in the future, at his second coming, he will descend upon the Mount of Olives, the very same spot where he ascended.